Advisory Committee meeting. Thank you all for attending. I guess we'll start with a roll call of the committee members. Paul Bertagna, Jared Black, Bill Durden, Luke Dines, Pete Caceres, Cassie Lacey, Jake Obrist, Chris Ogren, Mike Riley here, Erwin Swetnam, present, and Robin Bora here. So we don't have a quorum today, and we actually have some challenges going with appointed members of the SWAC. Ron is here representing Republic Services. The county commissioners approved the membership for the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and for Republic Services, originally it was Joe Deere, the general manager for the local Republic Services office. We've lost Jake Obrist from the city of La Pine. He's no longer employed with the city of La Pine, and we have lost I believe Bill Durden from the city of Redmond. So I'm going to have to correct this in January with the Board of County Commissioners. We will also include at that adding proxies for the local government representatives as well as the local collection companies here. So we have to make that correction. So we won't have a quorum for the meeting today. The only thing that was subject to vote today was approval of the meeting minutes. And we can hold off on that until the January meeting, assuming we have a quorum at that meeting. First order of business is approval of the November meeting minutes. Even though we can't approve them, I know Robin has some corrections he would like to make. So if you want to present those for the record here.
Okay, do I need to read them, or if we're not going to approve them, should I pass them around?
You know, why don't you read it, Robin? We have a copy from you that you emailed to us.
Right.
And if you read it, we can include that.
Okay.
We may have a quorum here.
Oh,
We have Cassie Lacey is present, so that gives us 50% of quorum.
50%.
Okay, yeah, so we are still short one on a quorum. So Cassie Lacey is here present. So anyway, Robin, if you want to read your comments, and they will incorporate those into the.
And I can pass them around so you can listen to me. So I just tried to clarify what I said at the last meeting, and I'll read you the edit if you'd like. Robin brought up potential wildlife impacts. Most of the sites are within mule deer habitat. He recommended talking to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife about which areas are more important than others for mule deer. He noted a landfill near existing or potential sage-grouse habitat will attract far-ranging avian predators of sage-grouse and so impact sage-grouse core habitat. They may be several miles from a landfill. He commented this will be an issue with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, especially the easterly sites near Hampton. He said the Milliken area is presently degraded sage-grouse habitat that could be restored. I think that's close to what I said.
Thank you. Yeah.
Does anybody want to, read that?
Okay, according to Sue, we do have a quorum. Does anybody else have any comments on the meeting minutes from November? So do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes as submitted with Robin's comments?
I'll make the motion.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, meeting minutes are approved. Thank you. Thank you, Robin, for those comments. On the agenda, so on the agenda, the next item on the yeah. So The published agenda had public comment as the next item on the agenda. And what we'd like to do is move that to the end of the meeting so we can get through the presentation to the advisory committee. And I believe that requires a motion to make that adjustment since we get that published meeting minutes. We have a motion to make that move. So move. Thanks, Keith. Keith Caceres moves. Second. Mike Riley seconds. Okay, so we will move forward.
So can I just make a?
Oh, yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, I do think that it's probably going to be helpful for everybody who's here today to actually sit through the presentation so they can kind of hear what the information is. And that's, from my perspective, part of the value. I do understand that sometimes in meetings like this, it's important for us to have, people have planned their morning and be able to get here at 9:20. That may be disappointing for folks who showed up today, but I do think it's important that everybody has the same base of information to start with. And as we all know, what we read in the media may or may not be complete. And I don't know how many people here have already done research into this and gotten good additional information, but I think it would be helpful for everyone to hear. This is the first time we've had much interest in the project. So it's good for us to have people here and talking about it as a community. And we knew this would start to happen once we had places on the map. So just to bring that into the conversation about why it's helpful or to move the time. I hope that doesn't disrupt people's days. But I think there's value in that for us. All of us here, individual property owners and neighbors in the community as a whole.
Maybe one thought, if there's somebody here who is here to speak about something besides the new landfill.
I'm not sure who would have something to speak of besides the landfill siting process. Does somebody have something other than that topic to present to us? So thanks for those comments, Mike. Yeah, our intent really is to get this information out and to perhaps have a few questions answered through the presentation here. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our team with Parametrics. Yeah, thanks. Dwight Miller or Andrew on this.
Yeah, so Dwight Miller, Parametrics. I'm here with Ron Rudnick, also with Parametrics. So we've been working on this project for actually a year. We kicked it off about this time last December and got started. And so what I'm going to do, many SWAC members will say, "Oh, this is a repeat from our last meetings," but I thought it would be good because we have a lot of members of the public to kind of go through the process we've been through, where we've been on this, and so that everybody's kind of understanding of that process. So where we've been, so like I said, we kicked it off last December. And got started on developing the siting criteria and the siting process. And largely what that was to go through federal, state, and local criteria or areas that we wanted to definitely include in the criteria, especially some federal and state requirements are out there. There's site characteristics that you have to have or not have on your site. And so we work those into the criteria right to begin with. So we went through that process, developed the siting criteria and the process for going through this. That was presented to SWAC, I think in 2 meetings in May and June. We presented it to the commissioners in June and had commissioner approval in July. And so that was then pretty much our marching orders to move forward into the next phase of the work, which was, so a major part of the criteria is determining fatal flaws. A lot of these really go back to the federal requirements, like you can't build a site on a recent fault line seismic area, steep slopes and things like that. Some additional ones were added in there, such as the core sage-grouse area. That was a fatal flaw. And so based upon all of those, we did a county-wide exclusionary area evaluation. And I'll actually show you the maps to take us through this, but I kind of wanted to explain it first. And then we applied the criteria and exclusionary areas to identify kind of areas of interest, potential parcels that could be out there that would not fall into the exclusionary areas and would meet the criteria generally that we're looking for a new facility. one of the things I do want to point out here is that this is kind of we do identify this as a solid waste management facility. It's not just a landfill. There could be, other things that are there to support solid waste. And this is particularly important going forward because there's going to be, what we're striving for is less landfilling, more processing, more reuse of materials. And so it's important to have a site that really works into the county's overall process here. The other piece of that that's really important to note is that that not landfill, not facilities are going to remain in operation. So transfer station, composting, recycling, that's all still going to be there. And it's important to note that because the new facility is going to be a limited access facility. So it is only for, for county operations. It's not going to have the public out there. And that has been a question that's come up. Well, what about all the traffic that's going to be out there? It's really going to be a minimum amount of traffic. I don't want to, say it's none. It's obviously not. But it is not a public facility like here, where the public comes in and, the weekend warriors on the can really queue up the line in the spring. And so that is not going to be the case with a new facility. So then we applied the criteria to develop the site layouts on parcel assemblages and then stored sites. So what that essentially was is we got it down to the parcel level and determined how a facility might lay out on that parcel. Not totally, but mainly just, okay, is there an envelope of a space that's big enough, for the solid waste facilities? And then we selected sites, and that was 13. Now it's 12 because one landowner decided not to be part of this process. And so that goes into focus screening based upon what our findings were. So the focus screening is what's next. And so this is today's meeting is kind of to bring the SWAC up to speed on where we're at, look at these sites, and then go forward into the focus screening next. Any questions on that process?
I have a question. You were talking about the number of traffic, and I think that's a huge thing on anybody's mind when it comes to a landfill.
Mhm.
What kind of number of transfer vehicles would you imagine on a typical day?
Ryan, did we have I'm trying to remember what our number was. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it is. I can't recall exactly what that is. I will put it in perspective. It's probably between 25 and 50. And so it's not, the hundreds that you have at an open access facility.
So there's another element to that question is where the site is located. If it's, for example, in the Bend area where it's within a range that the local garbage trucks could go to directly, they would. So it wouldn't be dumping it on landfill. We'd be doing a transfer there. So it really varies depending on what site ends up being selected.
That's important there too.
Yeah, no, there's definitely gonna be traffic analysis as part of it.
Yeah, there will be, but back to that point, there will not be any public, not at all. I mean, and so if there are some collection vehicles, those would still not be that many, if they were to go to the facility.
I do have just a follow-up question on that, just leading on what he was talking about, though. I mean, like if you're just talking about transfer vehicles, could be say 25 or 30 or 40, but if it includes local garbage hauling, it could be in the hundreds, right?
Not in the hundreds, no.
Not in the hundreds?
Not in the hundreds. No.
Okay.
No, because they're not all gonna go there. I mean, you don't necessarily want to drive by a site with your load to a transfer station and then come back. And so it's more those that would be actually in that vicinity. And for the most part, that's not going to be very many, especially on a daily basis. Yeah. So now I'm going to take you kind of through a series of maps that we've done to kind of show you the progress of our work. This is one, and actually the SWAC, we haven't shared this one before. This was just a kind of a process that the county went through before we even came on board. Just to look at what parcel assemblages might be out there that were publicly owned or privately owned, that were large enough size. Tim, I don't know if you want to, Tim or Chad, if you want to speak to it, but it was just to see if there were large enough areas out there essentially that could be developed. We made a real point of not looking at this in our work because we wanted to be unbiased in our development of the siting criteria and the process, and not look at getting down to a specific parcels and things like that, because this is pretty much based on parcels. It's the county GIS system, and what are the parcels that are out there that are big enough to that could be used. And so we did not look at this prior to doing the siting criteria. We just didn't really want to be focused in on any particular area based upon that. What you'll see, and obviously this is not informed by the fatal flaw analysis that we did, because you'll see a lot of this area drops off, especially out there on the east part of the county. So
On one of these maps, it might be helpful to folks if you find out a couple of geographic references like Pine Mountain, Horse Ridge, Pine.
There's Pine Mountain. Each of the cities is color, so you see Lapine at the south end, Bend in the middle, Redmond at the north. This mouse is not quite. So Sisters is up in this area here. So you can see this is the development corridor between Bend and Redmond. The Milliken is right out there, and the Brothers and Hampton are further east here. So
Where's the climb up Horse Ridge?
that would probably be
Right there.
Yeah, right about there would be my guess, right in this area here. Don't ask me to use that mouse. Yeah. So as I know, the first thing we did from our mapping work was the exclusionary area mapping. And so very quickly, we have some very large areas that fell out. So I think of particular interest is the areas there on the southeast, which are the sage grouse core areas. And so that's pretty much all of the pink out that way is that, except for some of the very smaller pieces are steep slopes in particular out that way. Up on the northwest, that's Metolius River setback. So the natural area there. And then the urban areas, so both city limits as well as urban growth areas, where we're generally off we're excluded. Some of the areas, especially down to the south, we're looking at it's not necessarily high groundwater, but wetlands that are part of high groundwater, as well as the floodplains along the Deschutes River. And so those are some of the things that fall out in this. But by far, the biggest exclusionary areas are the core area for sage grouse, airport buffers. Oh yeah, and the airport buffers. That's a good point. See if I have that. So just to know, so Redmond isn't actually this big. So this is the airport buffer area out here. This is the Bend Airport, and then right here, yeah, it is the Sun River Airport. Yeah.
Is the Redmond transfer station outside of that area, I assume?
The boundary of the airport exclusion zone is just at the transfer station itself.
Yeah, just barely, just a little south of it. Yeah. And and just so you know, transfer stations can actually be within the airport buffers. There are requirements when you have a transfer station within the buffer area, but they are allowed because there is not as large of a concern with the reason there is a buffer on airports is because of bird strike issues. And so those aren't nearly as major of an issue in a transfer station versus a landfill. And actually nowadays it's much less of an issue in a landfill than it used to be. I mean, when those rules were first put into play, landfills were not operated nearly as well as they are today. Rolling. Oh, there we go. Okay. So based upon exclusionary areas and looking at parcels that are available and, you know, more positive attributes, we came up with these areas of interest. The large blocks of green are federal lands. We generally decided not to focus on federal lands because of the difficulty in acquiring federal lands. Even BLM transfers can take, well, as Chad always likes to say, they take an act of Congress, which literally they do. And that it is quite an effort to go through that. Even if all parties are very excited about it, it's a long process and didn't necessarily want to focus on those types of sites. But at the same time, I saw a positive in being next to a federal piece of property, especially BLM, because it does provide for additional buffers from residential areas and the like. And so the purple here are just areas of interest that we started to look at in more detail before going into greater detail and scoring. And so after doing that, we got more focused in and looked at, I think this is, don't quote me, is this 30 or 31? 31 that we have on here. And so these sites were the locations that we got into more detail with as far as evaluating the at the parcel level. So once we got here, we were able to look at these areas. So we actually identified specific locations, the parcels, and we're able to do a lot more with this. And I probably didn't emphasize enough at the beginning, we're using online tools, the county GIS system, the state GIS system. So that's a graphic information system. And pulled all of that information in, and once we got down to the parcel level, we were able to get more information. And so it's at the broader level, it's a little bit less granular as such, and say there's less detail that you can pick up. But once we got down to the parcels, we got a lot more information. And so that's when we identified these sites. So at this point, we still have pretty good coverage across the county that we were looking at. And as you can see in the next slide, we will
Have existing transfer stations been a part of the process, like expanding an existing transfer station site? Or is it completely new areas?
No, it could be associated with a transfer station division, not landfill. As you see, there's a dot at the Negus transfer station. The county has a parcel up there, so that parcel made it off the list here. So, but they are really independent operations.
Yeah, I would say it was coincidental that it was there because that was a large piece of county property, and it met the criteria. So that's why it was there, because it wasn't necessarily because of the transfer station.
Okay, yeah.
Sir, a follow-up question. You mentioned an envelope for a reasonable amount of land to develop the transfer station. What is that size, the minimum? And
Yeah.
and is that federal, state, or an arbitrary decision? In other words, is it is it for cells? Is it a trenched transfer station? Is it sloped? Combination? What is the design criteria for that size envelope?
So when we did the solid waste management plan update in 2019, we identified a minimum acreage for the landfill itself at 250 acres and a target of at least a 250 acre buffer around the facility. So that was defined in the solid waste management plan. So that was one of the initial guidances. So that first map that Dwight and his team didn't see till last week was part of the effort we had done internally, and that 250 acre and 250 acre buffer combination was part of the criteria we used in our GIS to develop that initial map, that first map you saw. Okay.
So, well, one thing I was gonna show here, so that really is, that size is all based upon what the county's needs are. So, you know, how much material would be going in there, over what period of time, and then that determines kind of the size of the landfill that's needed at a given site. You'll see here that the county generally looked at 500 acre sites before, based upon the 250 for the site for the landfill, 250 for the buffers. We actually dropped that down a little bit down to the 300 because in some locations you might not have to have quite as wide a buffer. And also just to make sure that some sites made it through, just in case, it was not, there were not going to be enough sites. And so maybe you determine that, okay, instead of 100 years, we're going to look at 50 years or whatever it might be, just to make sure that there were some viable sites out there. As it turns out, and you'll see this soon, we actually ended up knocking out most of those smaller sites just because they weren't practical for the long term.
Can I just say something really quick? So these are all recorded, these meetings, and it would be great if before you ask a question, you could say your name for the record and for the folks that are listening online. We also have, maybe if Dwight could get through a little more of the presentation, then we can have more discussion at the end.
Certainly.
One other question regarding the meeting. So is the slideshow itself going to be viewable?
Yeah, it's online. I think now.
It'll be
posted
after the meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, all the packets are on there.
So I think Susanna made a good point. We'd intended to have the question and answers at this core part of it for the SWAC, and we'll have the open questions for the rest of the group here at the end of the presentation. So if you can hold off, maybe your question will be answered, but make sure you jot it down or keep it to yourself here, and then we can do it at the end here. If that works for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what we're looking at, identifying potential sites, consisting of parcel assemblages, generally looking at parcel assemblages less than 5 parcels. It gets to be pretty difficult when you're wrestling with more than that. That are outside the exclusionary areas and roughly between this 300 to 3,000. Not like there's an upper limit, but it's not like we need it. And so that was the main point there. And so if a parcel was larger than that, likely it would be, it's not that would fall out, it would just be that it would be a smaller piece of that would be identified. So developed preliminary disposal area footprints based on the buffers, topography, again, outside exclusionary areas. The point there, and this is why we say outside exclusionary areas at this granular level, is that there's a potential that an exclusionary area might kind of go into a parcel, but as long as we're staying out of that, it's not really an issue. The only place this really comes up is like on floodplains or steep slopes and some of those more geologic or hydrologic features that we want to keep away from, but they're not that large or they don't cover an entire parcel. And then we analyze the parcel level information available via our GIS resources. And so again, back to that. So these are county resources or federal resources or state resources. So we had a lot of information, and actually those resources are provided in the siting criteria document. And so you can see what sources we used for that. And then we scored sites according to the broad site screening criteria that are in the criteria memorandum. And then eliminate sites that have fatal or practical flaws, and I'll get into this practical flaws. Like, so just to kind of, yeah, this is not very easy to read. The main point I want to kind of show here is the we went through this process of the 31 sites, and a majority fell out due to fatal flaws or the practical flaws. The red here are the fatal flaws. So this was because primarily, steep slopes, floodplains, or core sage grouse habitat. And so some areas fell out due to that once we got into a more detailed evaluation. The green ones are the ones that then we took further look at. And so this is essentially that process. So the ones that have a full X room, those are the fatal flaw ones. The ones that have a half X, so like this is the kind of the strike and spare of the map. So the ones that have kind of just the half slash, those are the practical flaws. And the primary thing that dropped sites out were the small areas. We just determined that it was not worth taking the sites that were too small forward. And so we dropped those out. A couple others were, this one actually had a steep slopes. It was very visible, and at further evaluation, there's actually a resort development underway on the property. So it was not a piece of property that you'd want to try to acquire at this point.
Right, would your memory be good enough to do a quick run through of the sites you've eliminated, the 18 or whatever the number is? The ones that have the double X's.
So what I'll give a general review of that. So the ones down in Southwest in particular, these dropped out primarily because of groundwater, shallow groundwater, and issues around that. I mean, they came through initially in the site screening because they had good size and all that, but once we were able to get in at the site level, we could determine the number of wells around them, or wells on site, or the depth of the groundwater, and that dropped those out. A lot of the other sites actually also dropped out because of the number of wells near them, and wells on site. A well on site doesn't necessarily drop a site out, because if you're acquiring the site, that well can then be used for that site, or can be abandoned. But if we did consider the number of wells around the site, and this is just one of the very important points in is the protection of groundwater resources. And so that was one of the reasons why a lot of them dropped out. Some others were steep slopes, or just impractical layout of the sites. Have to abandon public roads, things like that. So they weren't that practical. And then, like I was noting, the practical flaws tended to be size, and then also some just irregular shapes. This one was a really odd shape. It had the acreage, but it was kind of a triangular shaped site right next to US 20 out in that area, and so it just wasn't that practical from that standpoint. And then I think, okay, and then this one here was the one that made it through the process, and then the owner said, no, I don't want my property to be included in the process, and so we removed that one as a practical flaw.
We had several comments earlier, about being close to Bend to reduce driving time. You kind of got double X, big X's through most of those, one practical flaw. Were they all just too small, or? They
tended to be too small, or the
the number of wells. I think this one was the number of wells up here, if I'm not mistaken. And then, and same with some of these other ones, they were just not, the location of it just didn't work out. And it was partly because of the wells, proximity to, to both public wells as well as private wells and those types of things.
So the
I think the point to be made, though, is that there are still sites that are fairly close in. And so from the standpoint of, location from the waste centroid, we've got, a couple here located fairly close to Bend, and then this one up near Red Bend.
and that one south of Bend is, what was the reason with that one?
This here,
And proximity to wells.
yeah,
Oh, well,
Both
Yeah.
private and domestic.
yeah, this was actually another place where the fault lines popped up once we got in at the parcel level. You could actually get more information on those, and that was actually one of the ones that was a Holocene fault, meaning it was there since the last 1500 or 15,000 years.
Try clicking.
There we go. Okay. So based upon that and taking out the fatal flaws and the practical flaws, we have identified these sites for going into the focus site screening. And at this point, Brian's gonna pick up. So
One more question, the scoring chart you had up there,
Mhm.
did you use the scoring to eliminate any sites so far? You had some, like, for example, like they were kind of a low score. Did you use that at this point, or is that gonna come mostly next?
So we really didn't, we used the scoring really more to get a feel for, I mean, if anything had been really low, it probably would have been dropped out. Nothing was really low. So it was fatal flaws and practical flaws that dropped sites out and brought us to this point. So what I like to say is that we kind of erased the chalkboard now, and we are looking at these sites at this more focused level going forward. And so everybody's gonna, all of the discipline leads, and we have a very large team looking at this, geologists, engineers and scientists. And they're all gonna take another closer look at the sites based upon having more information at the parcel level and being able to do some site reconnaissance of them. The one thing I will note in the focus, in this next level of focused review, we are not going out there with any type of major investigations, so like field investigations for drilling and things like that. That's a phase farther out. But we are going to take a closer look at these sites, and we've been able to, when you have 31 sites, there's only so much you can do. But when you're down to 12, then you've got, you can put more time into each site.
It might be helpful for us that are like less initiated in this to have like a one pager on each of the sites or something like that to kind of like look at some of the scores. Like for me, thinking
So-
about like transfer, oh, sorry.
Yep. Next slide.
So that's the next step.
Yeah,
We'll take.
perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll now give a brief walkthrough of each of these sites and the scores that were given to them. So we'll look at those in detail.
But maybe to pick up on what Chris is saying, you might want to put in the report, the ones that you've already eliminated, just a line why. To document that, and what you just narrated, put it.
Yeah, and that will be part of the documentation for it, yes.
Yeah, so this next slide compares the final 12 sites that were then selected to proceed to focus screening. And I think the value of this slide is it shows how each of the different sites compare with regard to the three main criteria, which are site characteristics and engineering, which is shown in yellow, natural environment criteria shown in green, and the land use criteria shown in blue. And if we look back at the map up top, generally you'll see, this wheel is. Try clicking.
Yeah.
Where you want to be?
You got a quick overview there of a couple of them. Okay. So here, generally, the sites are named according to their township range and section, and then we use the parcel as well if there needed to be distinction. And so generally, you'll see them move from north to south in that order. And so from here, you can kind of see how sites further north perform well with regard to the natural environment criteria. And then the sites, as we move further south, perform better in terms of site characteristics and engineering. But not quite as well with regard to natural environment criteria. And perhaps slightly better with regard to land use with less, displacement and adjacent land use impacts, things of that nature. So first site is 151300. And this is a county-owned parcel just east of Redmond, north of the Redmond Airport. And this is the property on which the Negus transfer station exists. And the parcel size here is approximately 1,200 acres. It's a very decent sized parcel. And this polygon that we've drawn is the anticipated developable area, which is 480 acres. And that's tailored to avoid adjacent well buffers to be at least a quarter mile away from those, as well as from the airport buffer zone. That's why it doesn't extend further to the south.
One thing I'll note on this, so this is kind of the area, the developable area. But as we were noting before, we're probably only needing, 250 to 280, depending on the site, as far as area. So it wouldn't actually take up that much of the space.
That's mostly juniper kind of degraded.
Yeah, generally.
Yeah, I think there was a fire through there in the 90s.
Years ago, didn't the Army used to run around and do training in that area?
That's south, that's closer to the airport.
And so this site is bordered to the east by BLM, which allows us to have a smaller setback from that area. compared to private properties.
Where's this site relative to the UGB?
Yeah.
The current UGB.
It's just to the east of the UGB. However, it's currently in the urban reserve area for Redmond, which is a piece we'll have to explore further in focus screening to see if a use like this would meet the criteria for the urban reserve
So
area.
just adjacent meaning it's like it begins a quarter mile or it's like immediately the boundary of the
Mhm.
of the UGB is the western boundary of the property.
So it'd be a little bit like not landfill, except in Britain.
Right, yeah.
Do we have any sense of like whether or not there are folks living on that property currently, like not owning it, but I mean like camping out there?
There are none.
Not,
They were relocated a while back and the road department had secured the property. It's like I mentioned, it had been burned, so there's not a lot of good tree cover out there. Primarily, those people are residing south and east of the transfer station.
got it. Thank you.
So with this site in particular, you can see how it performed fairly well with regard to the natural environment criteria, but not so well with regard to land use. Next site, ID 181300. This site is owned by Central Oregon Irrigation District. It's located just east of Bend, off of Bear Creek Road to the north, right here, and then Highway 20 runs here, and then Dodds is to the east. And its property area is 873 acres, and the developable area is approximately 416 acres, also outlined to avoid adjacent wells here, and provide a quarter-acre offset from those. And this site scored fairly well with regard to natural environment, but lower with regard to land use impacts, also fairly well for site characteristics and engineering.
Would they have be any critical irrigation ditches that have to be moved?
It's interesting there. What I heard was irrigation district acquired that property from a non-payment of dues or fees. So there's an irrigation canal, but it's well south of that. It's not actually a functional use for the irrigation district.
Where's Highway 20?
It's
Just
just
yeah.
south.
Even south from the.
And This is to the east of where Bear Creek intersects with Highway 20.
Yeah, just south.
Yeah,
East
okay.
of there.
Yeah, it's easy there.
Why is the land use scored so low? Like, what, are there other concerns that weren't mentioned? I know that's like consistently scored low across the projects, but,
Yeah, residences nearby, distance to nearest public road.
okay,
Um,
not urban reserve or anything like that. That could stay out there.
That's quite a ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll take a closer look at these scores as we move forward. And that was the thing I forgot to note, the comparison slide with the graph is that these scores are just the results of broad scrutiny.
Mhm.
Like I said, we'll start fresh with new information and existing information, building upon existing information. With new criteria that's tailored for this focused screening phase.
Excuse me, for the record, Tom Diamond, the site scoring, is it factoring the cost of purchasing the land? Like, for example, if the land is already owned by Deschutes County, does that make it a plus?
The way it's accounted for is in the site availability and acquisition potential and the ownership, so not at a specific dollar level, but
We'll get into the economics here later.
Okay.
Yeah.
so at a very broad level, acquisition potential is considered for its broad screening, but it'll be considered in greater detail during focus screening.
Question. So, you said the developable area was based on a setback from nearest wells, quarter mile? That's the,
Yeah,
if there was a well within a quarter mile of developable area, that would be a fatal flaw and it would have been limited, right?
The one thing I do want to point out is I kind of noted before, let's say if this is just by example, if there was a well on the far west end of the site, it would not preclude that parcel from being used because we would be able to be a quarter mile away from that well.
Practically, you're looking at a 250 acre footprint, a quarter mile from there.
Yeah,
Unless you bought the property with the well.
And it's-
yeah, exactly, and it can be used as part of the operation.
so next up, 18, 13, 15. This is an assembly of 5 different parcels owned by Deschutes County off of Rickard Road. Rickard Road runs here to the south, Highway 20 to the northeast. And the total acreage here is 683 acres. This developable area has been outlined similar to the others to avoid adjacent domestic wells that exist in the north and west sides of the property as well as the south. And this property, or this site performed very well with regard to natural environment criteria, lower land use. The next site, 191400-200. This is a single parcel owned by Moon Pit LLC. And this is 445 acres. An existing gravel mine or surface mine is here. And this is located just east of the National Badlands Wilderness Area and fairly close to Highway 20, which is a mile or two to the west of this site.
That's that near that trailhead, that big kind of opening.
It is.
And it's, yeah, just west of the dry canyon.
Yep. So not as good of a score with regard to natural environments. You can see how those criteria are reflected here in the scoring. But fairly well with regard to land use impacts. As there aren't many neighbors.
One thing I want to point out here, back to my point I made earlier about not necessarily wanting to get federal land or to be on federal land, but adjacent to federal land. So this is all adjacent to federal land. And so it allows for not quite as wide of buffers, there's no residents, in that area. And so that it allowed for more use of the property that's there.
Next site. 191400-2 2,400. This is an area also known as the Golden Basin. It's on the west side of Horse Ridge, southwest of Horse Ridge. There's several ridges that kind of emanate to the south and west of Horse Ridge, and this is between two of those. And so while this is a smaller property or total acreage and developable area, the topography is favorable in that sense, in that it creates a sort of natural bowl.
It's not too steep there.
It's steeper up towards the top, but where it's outlined, it's not too steep for development.
That'd be visible from 20.
No. I don't know where you can see it from, except maybe pilot view with a spotting scope.
Who owns that land currently?
It's currently on, and we do have a tax lot and ownership summary at the end of this that will show all of these. I believe the last name is Robert. 2 parcels totaling 634 acres. And this one performs best in category in the site characteristics and engineering criteria. The next site, 1914-00-3300. This is a collection of 5 different parcels, one of which is a BLM owned parcel, which is designated as Zone 2, identified for exchange for better resource lands. So that suggests there's a possibility of trading land with BLM to acquire that. The others, there's, I believe, 3 other property owners associated with these 4 other lots. The total acreage is approximately 646 acres. Nice shape. This is just southwest of Highway 20, setback several miles from there, I believe, and northwest of Pine Mountain. Generally.
Is that up on the Milliken Plateau or more down before you climb up?
That's a good question. I believe
It's on the plateau. I
I
think it's up. I believe it is up on the Milliken Plateau.
Yep. So the next site, yeah, and this one performs fairly well in all, with perhaps site characteristics and engineering is the best performing category for that site. The next site is 1916-00. This is a one single parcel with a private owner, approximately 1,245 acres altogether. You can see how it extends further beyond this spot. Highway 20 is here. This is further east. I believe we're getting close to Hampton at this point. Maybe no, Hampton's down here. And this is a ridge line here that's been included in the developable area for potential bill against the ridge line. So a lot of flexibility though within this footprint, being 567 acres. Again, only 250 acres would be needed for the landfill itself. So
And again, surrounded by federal land.
right.
Is that east or west of Geomillican?
I believe it's east. Yeah, so Pine Mountains here. Large brother sage grouse zone here, so. That's where this one sits. Next site is 2015-00-300. This is a single parcel. Well, actually, the developable area includes Deschutes County land and a parcel owned by the Roth family. And this is just north of Pine Mountain and south of Highway 20. A lot of working room, developable area here. 845 acres approximately. So a lot of flexibility within this footprint to find the most suitable location. Scores very well with regard to site characteristics and engineering criteria.
So which one is the environmental score of those 3? I can't read that.
It's the one in the middle. Site characteristics and engineering, natural environments, and then land use.
What public road is cutting through that property?
Is that Pine Mountain Road?
Pine Mountain is the road on the left side.
Yep,
That's Ford Road.
Ford's to the north, and then
That's the northern road, Ford Road.
yeah.
Highway 20 and then Ford Road.
So that would most likely be my neighboring lot. And I wasn't identified for that piece of property. We can continue that.
Next site is 21-1900. This is a state-owned parcel southwest of Highway 20. Developable, or the total area is 625 acres, single owner, state of Oregon. Decent amount of working room here. I believe it's a mile or so from the highway, so not right against the highway, so decent setback and low visibility.
And to the north of the highway.
This is southwest of the highway, so the highway's about here. Scored fairly well across the board. Next site, 21-2000. Another state-owned parcel, and you can see the slight outline of the other one here. So these two were the previous site right here. Then this site, just on the other side of the highway. Some of the land is being leased by this farmer, we believe, for additional agriculture. And so, but it's a large parcel. This one's approximately 2,117 acres altogether in this shape. And so there's several different opportunities for configuration of a solid waste management facility.
And there aren't, the hurdles for state-owned land are less than federal.
Yeah, that's good.
But what's required to get access to this ownership perspective. I guess.
That's
Is it an
correct.
act of
And
the
that-
legislature or?
Yeah, and actually the point there, it's good to raise that will be, definitely more fully evaluated during the focus screening. The actual process and timing for that, because that will kind of go into the score of availability and, process that will take.
Got two more. Out of the far end, this parcel is owned by the GI Ranch, site ID 22-2200-200. It in total is about 2,900 acres. And so there's a lot of flexibility for the layout and configuration of the facility here. This is, I believe Glassview Road is nearby. It's just north of Glassview, north of Highway 20, which runs down here. So pretty far out.
Yeah, just south of the county line.
Just south of the county line, yeah, right here. And then the final site, 22-2200-400. This is also owned by the GI Ranch, just to the west of that other parcel, which is on this side of this road. And slightly different scoring though, given proximity to some natural resources here and whatnot. And this in total is a 640 acre parcel. Nice rectangular shape and flexibility to develop within that. So decent scoring in terms of site characteristics and engineering and zoning or land use, but not so great with regard to natural environments. So hopefully that helps to kind of illustrate how each of these sites were examined and how they score in terms of the different criteria.
So one thing I want to point out here, people go, oh, what order are they in? Well, it is kind of interesting because they are in order of their number. And that tends to just go south. And so that's why Negus was at the far north. And then they go all the way out the boot there, and so that you toe the boot so that you see the farthest south side is the end.
Yeah, so this is an
Can I ask
ownership.
a question? Has there been any, to what extent has there been input or screening from the native community or around sort of archaeological resources for any of these sites yet?
We have reached out to the native community. We have not heard anything back from that. It was a challenge to find somebody to reach out to. It's been better.
Yeah, so we sent letters to the Burns Paiute tribe, the Klamath tribes and the Confederated tribes of the Warm Springs, to the tribal councils and their natural resources staff. About, let's see, end of November, beginning of December, and offered to meet just to keep them updated on the process and everything. But the focus area screening will be a much deeper dive into the whole cultural resources thing. But we wanted to make sure we at least contacted them, but we haven't heard anything.
So no real review of any of that.
There's been review from the standpoint of evaluating, and I don't want to say publicly available information, but it is state available information. And so our cultural resources subconsultant, Willamette, has access to that and then determine, if a site had identified resources or not, either on the site or adjacent to the site. And that's what the evaluation was for the broad site. We will go into more detail on that at the focus, but we will still not actually do full site recon yet at this point. But this is one reason why we really do want to connect with the tribal communities on these.
And so if anything was identified in that review, it's not necessarily, it wasn't used as a fatal flaw.
No,
It was just listed as there is something adjacent, or there might be something on the site
Yeah.
based on what we know. And these
Yep.
databases.
Yep.
But it's just information at this point.
It's information at this point, yeah, because nothing was, actually, I don't think anything was eliminated because of that at this point. There was other reasons the sites were limited.
So, distance from the centroid, distance from the band, is that a criteria that's been incorporated, or is that yet?
It is, and so that comes into play in the operation site development. And so haul distance to waste centroid. So for instance, this site here had a 1. It was the farthest out by far. And so it got the lowest score, whereas the ones that were closer in had scores of, I think, 3, and we might have had a 5 or a couple 5s. Yeah, for that.
That's a huge impact to
It
the
is.
operational costs.
Yes, it is very big.
So the management plan assumed 30 miles out when they did the economic analysis of that. And at 200,000 tons a year, that's like $1.5 to $2 million a year to get it out 30 miles.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at a site here, that's 60 miles
60
out,
miles.
you got twice as much
Mhm.
distance to go there.
Yep.
Huge economic impact. And I think there will
It
be
is.
a little bit more economic analysis here as we get closer.
There is, and we'll get into this in more detail, but I will answer that now, Tim, and that is that. So part of the focus screening will be to do additional economic analysis. And so that's both for capital as well as operations. And I think what we'll see for the most part is that the differentiator in that in large part will be operations because of haul distances and the like, because that is a huge dollar item. Yeah.
That's only
Environmental-
going up.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly, going up too.
Environmental impact of carbon footprint, the further out you are.
That's right. Yep.
I think it'd just be a good point to make a comment on the environmental metrics. So far, my understanding is that you haven't used your scoring metrics to remove a site. All right, so, you have fatal flaws or wells or something, but you haven't really, the score, whether it's a 3.0 or 2.6 or something, did not eliminate a site so far.
No, mainly because the fatal flaws and practical flaws dropped us down to, a dozen sites.
So these 13 don't consider haul distance or other things so far. Oh, well, I guess one comment on the environmental score, it looks like a lot of them are around 3. When you measure a lot of different things, I don't know if it really tells you that much. Because, for example, wildlife, in Deschutes County, there are 4 or 5 species, when it gets down to it, that people are really concerned about. You know, whether it be mule deer or bald eagles or golden eagles or spotted frog, few plants, and sage grouse. You know, sage grouse came close to being listed. The Republicans have blocked that consistently with bills in the legislature saying that it cannot be analyzed further by the Fish and Wildlife Service. That could change at some point. You know that nationally the sage grouse population has declined 80% in the last 50 years. 56% of the habitat's gone. The Oregon goal is 30,000 birds. We're down to 13,800 something. The Brothers Paulina area has had those areas you showed there, about a 3 to 4% decline a year over the last 4 years. And it's been a steady downward trend over more than 40 years with those two areas. So, I mean, when you measure a whole bunch of scores, something like that doesn't necessarily jump out, it's going to be pretty significant. Yeah, if something got listed, I mean, it's going to be, it'll be affect this landfill's to last a long time. It will affect the operation of the landfill as well as all the surrounding ranchers will have to deal with that. Right now, the emphasis has been on Fish and Wildlife Service developing these conservation agreements with ranchers so it doesn't get listed. But an action like this is the kind of thing that can push us towards listing. I mean, to me, that, you know, all the ones from the Milliken Plateau, because of the way the predators will be attracted to landfill, sage grouse predators, avian predators. All the ones from the Milliken Plateau going east are going to be problematic. And the ones adjacent to or real close to a core area, the most problematic. I'd be surprised if the ELM, that one piece they had was right adjacent to the core area. I'd be really surprised that when the wildlife biologists get hold of that they would go over that trade. Same with the state lands, but if Oregon Fish and Wildlife gets involved, I don't know if they will, you know, I know they're independent offices in the state, but I can see that one controversial.
That's a good point, especially access to those government properties, both state and federal.
Yeah. Thank you. Those would be great points to explore further in the screen. Yeah. So this is a summary of the tax lots and ownerships. We've broken those up by site, right? So you can see the groupings of the parcels involved. So this, again, this will all be sent out after this meeting presentation, so you can review in further detail. But this is general overview of those sites and constituent parcels and ownership. And so where do we go from here? So the process moving forward will be, as a part of the focus site screening, which we've already started on to some degree in notifying property owners, nearby neighbors, and the general public of the site selected for focus screening. Check, got that done already. Next will be then confirming the acquisition potential for each site based on further correspondence with property owners. And that's also begun to some degree in eliminating one of those sites initially identified for focus screening.
And I will just point out, and you know, good point, Robin, that, you know, these agencies are going to be looking at a full cast of reasons, you know, to either allow or not, or disallow, you know, acquisition. And so it's not just public properties that we're looking at, or I mean, private properties that we're looking at here, but also acquisition potential for public properties.
And we will then analyze parcel level information available via GIS and additional other resources in greater detail, including economic considerations. So that's where we'll incorporate more detailed analysis of haul routes and the costs associated with that. We'll then score these 12 sites according to the focus site screening criteria. And then finally, we'll select 3 to 5 top candidate sites for comparative site alternative evaluation and the environmental review process. And that is that next phase where we'll have more detailed on-site investigations to get a more concrete understanding of those final sites. Let's see. SWAC questions, comments?
So is there a slide that has a timeline for this
Yes.
things? Oh, okay.
That's coming up. But any other SWAC questions and comments on those 12 sites just yet?
I have a question.
Well,
SWAC
SWAC first, I want to make sure we. Any other SWAC?
It's my only other thought, and I think several of us have mentioned those 3 sites in Hampton, given the distance and all those things. I mean, do you really want to spend the time analyzing those? It seems like, you got sage grouse against it, you've got distance, you've got greenhouse gases, some of that is mule deer habitat, pronghorn habitat. I thought it would just make your life simple, and at least not consider those 3.
Hey, this is Emily Widener from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Bend. I wrote a comment in the chat and just kind of echo a little bit what Robin said. I would really strongly encourage you all, in addition to the property owners and neighbors that you plan to coordinate with in this phase of the process, I would coordinate with various land and wildlife management agencies, because potentially the information they provide will narrow the selection. Whether or not that's BLM's process going through NEPA and then also tiering that to their RMP, their range management plan, DSL's process, cultural clearances, as well as recommendations from our agency, Fish and Wildlife Service, and then Oregon Department of Wildlife. And sage grouse is a primary concern given the proximity of some of these sites to core area. And I will let folks know right now that core areas are currently being redrawn. The boundaries are being redrawn by ODFW. And so we can expect to see a draft of those probably sometime in March. And so those are things that I think would be good for folks to keep in mind, because I don't know if any of the comments would then eliminate any of these sites, but it would be good prior to going out for public comment. And I'm not sure how the county process works for that, but just kind of a heads up on that.
Thank you. Is there a way to ensure that that happens early, this kind of coordination that she's referring to? In particular for those sites that are in the east southeast? Is that like a primary sort of initial effort?
That is kind of that next step for, for our, under our environmental natural resources review is more detailed review of the sites, which would include agency discussion.
Awesome, great to hear, thanks.
I don't sense right now that group wants to eliminate the 3 sites. Which would be my proposal.
I have a concern.
Go ahead and
Are we
say your
opening it up?
name.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if if it was working or not. Anyway, my name is Kat O'Connor and I live on Bear Creek. And I saw a correction on the COI property that I wanted to make a correction on. We have an active eagle nest with fledglings and stuff like that. They've been there for years on Bear Creek. And we also have an active osprey nest right on 10 bar and 20. So I thought you said on the sheet that was on the COI that there were no birds, no brown eagles. I can't remember, it's not in front of me anymore. But I wanted to make that correction that we do have bald eagles and osprey within that area. That's it.
Thank you.
Should we proceed? Yeah. There's another.
Any more SWAC?
I just want to emphasize, I think it's really important that we get input from the tribes before we get to the 3 to 5, like that's, if that means getting in the car and driving up there. I know that at least for the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, there's some sort of coordinating meeting that happens monthly up there. And there may be a way to get on that agenda that involves talking about a whole range of issues. The starting point, I might be able to help make the connection there, but it seems really important that happens.
This is Emily Widener with Fish and Wildlife Service again. Sorry. I can speak a little bit to Warm Springs. Austin Smith is their new natural resources person. Bobby Bruno moved into a different role. So they've been pretty busy. So it would be good to follow up with them. I heard that you sent the comment letter to them, or the letter to them in late November. I would just suggest, poking them via email or, going up there, but poking them via email or calling them first would be a really good idea. Same for Burns Paiute. I do know they're wildlife biologists, and that person could put you in contact with other folks in the tribe.
We sent them email letters as well, so but we'll follow up with all of them and try and make direct contact. It was Oscar for the.
That's right.
Kat O'Connor here again. It was brought to my attention that I was one that brought up about the bald eagles and the osprey nest. We also have so many owls here, and I neglected to mention the owls, but I know they're not on the list, but I think they're important to be recognized. Thank you.
Great. When we get to the SWAC members, comments and questions before we, yeah. Much further.
I think that Robin's making a really good point about the combination of factors related to sage-grouse and the concerns about cost and GHG emissions in the southeast. So I guess I tend to want to just leave sites on there to start with.
Yeah.
Just to share that broad concern. It makes a lot of sense that we may want to consider sooner rather than later, removing some of those sites.
No, I totally hear you on that.
Makes sense to go through it.
Yeah, at this point, we really did want to provide for those sites that were viable sites. I mean, on paper, they're viable sites. We didn't have as a fatal flaw over 50 miles away or 30 miles away from the Lake Centroid. And so from that standpoint, these came forward. But, especially under the economic evaluation, which we can kind of hit on fairly early in our process, at least to kind of start looking at that at a little bit higher level. We can use that to probably winnow out some sites. But we'll take a look at that for sure.
Or skinny it down.
Yeah, skinny down a little bit and, probably we're gonna find through some of the reviews already been suggested that we're gonna have more problems related to sage-grouse.
Yeah.
And we've got these other complicated factors.
Yeah.
Cost and GHG. Put all that together.
To some extent, when we did the initial analysis and had fatal flaw areas, during the broad screen, fatal flaws came up. I expect it could be fatal flaws that come up in the.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we got it. You got it.
I think they should go through a process still, because I just think it's
Yeah,
it's
right,
kind
right.
of
I think it-
problematic to just be like,
I
Our
kind
gut
of agree
feel.
for that reason. I'm just expressing that.
yeah, I think
it's
it makes
likely.
sense, like, we know the numbers will show that,
Yeah,
but we
right.
should still put them through the numbers, so we have the documentation.
Yeah, we did develop a citing criteria process that was vetted by the SWAC and approved by the board. So that's the process we're going through. So, some of these may fall out, like I said, fatal flaws may come up in focus screening analysis on certain sites. We're talking about economics, I can drop things out as well.
It's been, what is the cost of analyzing each of these sites? If it's, I would spend more money analyzing the ones that are more promising than you think are gonna be problematic anyway. But it depends how expensive it is too.
But we have a process that has been approved by the county commissioner, so the expectations will follow that process at this point.
Yeah, we will. And the one thing is, are there some aspects that will come through it? Because there could be some items that we haven't we haven't looked at a site close enough yet to determine maybe there is another fatal flaw in it, or there is some other issue that would, a practical flaw. For instance, it takes the state process for acquisition is as difficult as a federal process once we start talking to it, or something like that. I just throw that out there. That's another thing that could come into play on it.
Or mitigation.
Or, yes, mitigation. Yeah.
I agree with Chad, following the process is key, because that way it's consistent across the board as you review each of these individual sites. And so for citizens at large of the county, we're providing that consistency, which is important.
And the process is in place.
Correct, and approved.
You see that. So, Kim, can you hear us? So, to respond to Kim's comment, after the meeting, the slideshow will be posted, and the individual scoring during the broadside screening is on each of those slides for the individual sites. So the information she's looking for will be available.
I'm
just trying to get.
Oh, boy.
I don't know. I think it's supposed to be a 30 roll or.
Yeah. Like someone else. Well, I can go ahead and just.
Start on.
I was gonna have-
Somebody else tried it. Not like. What? I need to ground myself. So we will get to questions after I think this is the last slide, unless if somebody need to leave this.
I have to leave just for Dr. Swim. I thought public input would be in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make an exception for you. So you can state your name and we'll go from there.
So I'm Dr. Andrew Austin, Director of Zone 5 for the Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm here representing myself, not the district or board. 21,500-300 is my neighboring lot, and I have not been notified. So I wanted to put that on record. Obviously, besides the fact that the Ford Road is my driveway and it says it's abandoned on the map, I just have concern with sage grouse. It being in the executive use farm zone land, the high winds that we have. If you look on the groundwater maps and wetland maps, the streams that are classified through full subject property, the mule deer winter zone, the wildlife area combining zone, and just the antelope free range. Just besides like that, I know two other residents that neighbor the property, and the active well that's been established since the 1800s that on that property. That could potentially contaminate mine and my neighbor's well. I just wanted those key points put out.
I am concerned that you did not get a letter, so we're gonna research that. We have found that dial is not a perfect system, and I believe that's what you guys used to develop the mailing list, right? Yeah. So I apologize if you dropped off that, but we're gonna investigate and see if there's anyone else we missed on that, so I appreciate that part of the information as well.
Yeah, and one thing I will also note, and we'll get to the public comments, and I know you have to leave, so it is to provide written comments too, because those are really valuable for us to be able to track and make sure that we get all the detail of your comment.
Okay, I did reach out via email about a week ago and haven't received a response. So,
And I'm sorry, what was your name?
Dr. Andrew Austin.
Yes.
We did respond, okay.
We should have responded. There should be an email that went back to you.
Okay.
We can resend it just to make sure.
Yeah.
Check your spam.
Thank you.
Good input.
Sorry.
I have one question about night illumination. Is the facility at nighttime to have lights that emit lights out there?
It would typically be any lighting out there would meet the county's lighting ordinance, but there's not a lot of activity tonight. If you've ever been out to Mount Landfill at night, it's kind of scary. If there's a building, there would be security lighting around the like pocket lighting on the outside of the building or something like that, but not a lot of lighting. And anything we would put out there would have to meet the county's code for that.
Generally speaking, especially for these more isolated sites, really tried to go with dark skies approach, so that we eliminate glare.
From Milliken to Fort Rock.
Can you state your name?
My name is Jonathan. Last name Ashworth. Darkness of the scale from 1 to 10. 10 is no longer even around the observatory for top of Pine Mountain from Oregon State. We go up there a lot of time, and that's a concern as well. So there is a darkness scale of 9 from Milliken to Fort Rock, and we want to keep it that way.
Okay, real quick, before we go into formal public comment, I was gonna have Chad put him on the spot. He's been doing quite a few interviews and things like that lately, so I don't know if you want to talk about any of those, Chad.
So we've got media contacts, Ben Bolton primarily. I was stood up by one of the local TV stations yesterday. They were supposed to show up around 10 o'clock. No hurt feelings on my side with it. We did do a press release out to the media agencies there. We've had a few radio interviews. We're trying to schedule up a few other meetings with other groups here. I think you're going to touch on those. And we spoke with Mike this morning before the meeting about getting together with the Central Oregon Conservation Network, hopefully in February.
So yeah, we've had a lot more interest lately since property owners were notified, and there was a press release that went out. So I think the project's gonna kind of continue to get people pretty excited and then maybe taper off a little bit. So we'll keep you updated on that. And Chad and Tim have been continuing to meet with folks who are interested in the process in person and on the phone. Chad was really busy last week, so trying to talk to everybody personally. The story map we've been working on about the project should be live by the next SWAC meeting. We're hoping to get it done before this one, but it just took a little bit more than we were anticipating to get that going. We're going to be starting county newsletter updates in January. So if you're signed up for those newsletters, those county e-news, you'll get those. Get my notes. Let's see. And then I was going to mention too that we've received a lot of email comments. I don't know if any have come in the mail, but mostly emailing the managethfuture@DeschutesCounty.org email address. And what we plan to do is kind of compile them for all of the SWAC members, probably every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know, not to overwhelm you all, and maybe try and do a summary memo of the nature of the comments. So you can see all those throughout the process. So we'll make sure we're going to start doing that probably after Christmas, probably with the holiday coming. It's going to be hard to get that out before Christmas, but we'll see if we can maybe do something by this Friday. See if we can pull that together. And then
you'll definitely have it before the next one.
Yeah. We don't want to give it to you at the SWAC meetings. We want you to have it in between them so you can come to the SWAC meetings after you've read all the comments. And then planning to go to the Board of County Commissioners for an early update early next year. And then our open house is scheduled for April 6th. Those will be on the finalist sites. So the final 3 to 4, 5, however we're down to. So stay tuned for that.
And I'll show you a little bit more detail on the next slide. And this might actually answer other questions that we might have. So kind of just the next steps in the process here. So we'll be doing the focus screening of these 12 sites, gather additional data and score according to the focus siting criteria, which are pretty much the same criteria, but some actually we set up so that we could do more detailed evaluation at focus versus what we could do at broad. And then also the operations and cost evaluation, which is really critical. It's really to provide, additional information for decision makers, the SWAC, as well as the Board of County Commissioners, so that you have all the information you need to help make these decisions. So
as Susanna said, so March, we'll have 3 to 5 sites identified for more extensive evaluation. And this is when we go out and we do, if there's wetlands, we do wetland delineation, we do stream delineation, we do actual walkthroughs for cultural resources. We do some exploratory drilling for geology, hydrogeology. And so it's a very extensive process. That's why we only want 3 to 5 sites. We want to really get that focus down at that point on these sites that we're looking at. So that's a pretty long process to do all of that. It's, a lot of field work and all. And so we're looking at spring of 24 to have that done, have that information, and SWAC making, the recommendation for the preferred facility to the commissioners. So, and then the near term community outreach, again, at the SWAC meetings coming up, we'll give some updates on the focus screening, probably not a lot of updates on that, but some, but definitely on the public comments. So public comments that are coming in, as Susanna noted, we will be compiling those, and we'll be getting them out to SWAC before those next 2 meetings. And so you'll have that, that'll be kind of part of your opportunity to consider those, discuss it as a group and with us. And then again, at the March meeting, have the focus screening results. So kind of unveiling the 3 to 5 sites, and then the open house in April.
With respect to public participation, can we see who the 29 participants are so we know who's listening to this?
Yeah.
Here, you do that. I'm not touching this.
And really quick, I just wanted to say, like, the public outreach you guys are doing something right, because we've got way more people here today than to commend you for that work.
Yeah, and this, we have a record of attendance too, so
Okay.
this will all be in the minutes, but yeah. Does anyone online want to provide public comment or have additional comments?
We have one chat, we have us.
Yeah, hi, my name is Thomas Wisdom. I live on Bear Creek, and I live less than a mile from the edge of the Bear Creek property, and I was not notified about this. And I know a number of people along Bear Creek were not as well. And I think there needs to be a bit more notification rather than just an arbitrary distance, because there are people up and down Bear Creek that would be impacted from this that I know were not notified, including people that are less than a mile from the edge of that. Additionally, another comment is I would like to know or see if there was actual mapping of wells that was actually done for these parcels, because I know for the Bear Creek parcel, there are a number of wells in adjoining properties in that area that I'm not sure are being taken into consideration as well. So I know at least one property that has a well that adjoins the Bear Creek parcel.
Well, I'll let Ryan touch on the well location. On the letters are only sent to properties that abut the candidate site. So there was no distance established for notification at this stage. We're gonna do much further outreach when we get beyond the focused screening effort. So Ryan, if you want to comment about the.
Yeah,
well
and to
access.
confirm, we did map domestic wells. OWRD's mapping tool, it doesn't always place them at the exact location, but based on the data that's provided by OWRD and brought into our web map, we did see those adjacent wells on properties adjacent to that site. And then we did adjust that footprint to avoid those and be at least a quarter mile away from each of those neighboring wells.
Anyone else online want to, I guess we're doing public comment now?
Should we go next slide? Let's go to the next slide. Let's finish that first.
Okay.
Yep,
We're there.
yeah, we're there. All right. So, yeah, so I take it the SWAC has got their questions answered, and so the SWAC meeting officially goes till 11. Wanted to open up for public comment, but as I noted before, it's really helpful to have written comments. And so this is where written comments can be sent. And so it really
I don't want to say preferred, but it certainly helps to do it that way. I mean, we'll obviously take your verbal comments as well. But please do note your name, and then, you know,
We know how many people actually wanted to give comment today. So that's at least about 30 minutes of comments. So I just would ask that people kind of think about that, approximately 3 minutes max. We're not going to be maybe too official, right, with timers and all that kind of stuff like in some meetings, but just so everybody gets a chance. Right? So just think about that
Plus you're
one.
online.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, do we have more online?
Anyone else online want to provide a public comment? Okay, just go ahead and put it in the chat if you do, and I'll look at it once in a while. We're just about to start the in-room public.
Well, let's start at the front row left side.
All right. My name is Daniel Baca. I live on Bear Creek Road and have a series of questions and comments. I was actually notified because I'm one of the properties that's right by there. One of my questions is, what is your guys' setback for your sage grouse habitat? Like how, did you guys have a 1/4 mile setback for wells? What was your setback for being away from sage grouse habitat?
Sites were scored differently based on their proximity to different zones, whether it was in a low density habitat overlay zone or and then also distance from that. And the threshold was 3 miles or greater, got a better score. Yeah. And so that's detailed in the site.
Yeah.
Site criteria.
And that is definitely one of the areas that will get more detail going into.
All right, so I live right next door. I have a well. My wife and me are both local from here. We're born and raised in Central Oregon. I love to have my kids also experience that same thing. I built my own house. I drilled my own well. I didn't just pick out colors and shapes of my place. I actually built it. And it's going to be now right next to the new proposed landfill. I just want you guys to know that we're real people. We have faces. We're not just anonymous people. And you guys give 3 miles of zoning for sage grouse, yet you only give me a 1/4 mile from my well where I eat, sleep, live, and raise my kids. I find that slightly offensive. You also have these exclusionary zones for Bend, Redmond, Sisters, all these cities, right? And it has to do a lot with people, right? So these people got exclusionary rights, whereas we don't. Yet we're still people. I find that also an interesting point. Out at my place, we have a ton of wildlife that go through there. Just 2 days ago, I can show you pictures of deer in my backyard, 4-point buck, 3 does with her. We have elk, we have owls, we have eagles, we have coyotes, we have rabbits, we have all kinds of stuff. It just, there's no barrier between they only stay on BLM land and they only stay on, not go on to COID land and they don't go into our property. There's the boundary moves, and yet, you know, BLM and federal land gets more of a distinction than we do. And we'd like to keep our wildlife in those locations, because that's one of the reasons why we live out there, you know, to be able to integrate with it. So now though, my other question is, why did you guys choose 100 years as your end goal for this meeting, for this landfill? To me, that seems kind of like a short-sighted goal, because that puts the burden of 100 years isn't very far. It now puts my grandkids, even my children are gonna have to deal with this problem in 100 years. You know what I mean? And yet it seems like their property choices and your size should be at a much larger and grander scale. So that way, you know, our kids aren't dealing with this. So another thing's Lake County is proposing an 8,000 acre site to the south of us near Fort Rock. You can read about in Central Oregon Daily. why is this not mentioned in any of the criteria? And why are we not talking with them and figuring out if this is a viable solution to have an integrated approach to dealing with landfill here in Oregon, not just have it pigeonholed in Deschutes County, knowing that Deschutes County takes care of it. So their proposal was to have it off of one of the main rail lines. Why are we not trying to work hand in hand with that? So, and also in your 100 years, you know, you guys talk about the cost of trucking and things like that, and where we've come in the past 100 years is we're right there. You can see the picture on the wall. People are bringing their garbage to us and horse and buggy. And in the future, we're either be doing electrical or hydrogen and things like that. And so to me, some of the distances, you know, don't necessarily make as much sense when you try to keep it as close over this 100-year span, or if you actually make it a real approach and talk about it in an indefinite plan or 500-year plan, that makes more sense. Okay, also 80 to 90% of the waste that's generated here in Deschutes County is not in the east of Bend. 89% of the waste that's generated here in Deschutes County is over there. So why are we sticking 80 to 90% of our waste out in the east of Oregon? It seems like a much better solution is that we have this facility on the Highway 97 corridor where the vast majority of the waste generated can be properly trucked, shipped, and dealt with. There's already, you know, rail lines, you know, highways in place that people can use and integrate. So, which I guess we do have one candidate that's in Redmond that is on Highway 97 corridor. I got one, couple more.
Yeah.
Also, there's a piece of property that didn't even make it to this, directly to the south of us, like property right to the south of the landfills for sale right now. It's 452 acres. You can't get any closer to not landfill from that, and yet it's not even on here. If you're talking about getting rid of trucking costs and shipping costs and things like that, but wasn't even put on there. So in conclusion, you know, like, I just want to say we're here with real people, and I'm sure you guys are going to hear from other people in different locations that talk about why theirs is more important or not more important, but just consider that we're real people.
Just very briefly on to the questions, the Lake County landfill site has gone completely dark.
Okay.
The county commissioners were approached by that, and they elected to stay on the path we were on. Their prospect of purchasing a ranch in the Fort Rock area failed, and we haven't heard a thing since then. It's been probably 8 months since there's been any activity on that. On the 100-year thing, that was established on the solid waste management plan, and I'm not sure if I have a good answer for you on that. It's unusual that you would cite 1,000-year capacity. I will quote the former director, 100-year site may be the very last landfill ever cited in Deschutes County. What technology, waste diversion brings in the next 100 years, that landfill may last 1,000 years. So those are the two questions I wanted to touch on correctly. And I want to keep us moving on it. And I'd appreciate if you could submit, you had a lot to say there. If you could send that to Brian. Yeah, I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Want to continue across the road?
Yes.
Okay, James Bouzian. I live on Bear Creek Road, 0.6 of a mile from the site. Daniel and I are neighbors, so I'm not going to reiterate most of everything I agree with what Daniel said. I want you to think about some of the softer things. Over the years, many people that live here have been lamenting the loss of rural Bend, the way Bend used to be. I built and sited my ranch out there because that's the kind of Bend I wanted to live in. I'll go and spend $200 on a steak downtown, but I live on a ranch with cattle, meat birds, chickens, eggs, horses. Many of our neighbors have children. We walk our horses, dogs, children down Bear Creek Road. We have double access to the BLM out there. I'm not diminishing where anybody else lives, but we are in fact in town. And that's our lifestyle there. And that's why I live in Bend. You have an opportunity to maybe to add that to your criteria list. We've already heard about the great horned owls and all the animals that are there. That was a tiny list of the animals in the wildlife that we see. I want to talk about your mission statement in 2018-19, and I understand there's a bureaucratic process, but it says Deschutes County will work cooperatively with cities and service providers to offer citizens and businesses an integrated solid waste management system that delivers quality and cost-effective services while achieving the best use of our resources, reducing waste and landfill. You've talked a lot about budget, greenhouse gases, crunching numbers. I didn't hear anything in there about humans mentioned. Talked about the animals, but I didn't hear quality of life for the humans in there. And that's what Daniel touched on. I believe my quick dive into the USDA RCS system looks like that site's ill-suited. Lava plains, granite, blue rock, but maybe you could dig it out, not certain. Two last points. The existing landfill, 1972. The neighbors there did not exist. I did a quick dial search, 1975 on Bobcat Road. You see a few things. Everything else is like 1985 and forward. They chose to be there. I did not choose to live there. I could have bought land over there, I didn't. So there's that. Last thing I would ask you, and by the way, I want to thank Chad. We talked personally, very kind. All of you sounded very informed. I thank you for all your hard work. And it's going to get harder probably, but I would like you to consider, I heard a lot about finances. Sometimes things are expensive. I used to work in municipal government. Try not to take the expedient way out and consider the humans that live here. And what I mean by that is Freightliner, Tesla, Volvo, Hyundai, Daimler, Cummins, they're all coming out with electric vehicles. Oregon just banned gas and diesel vehicles by 2035. That should actually move way up your list on, maybe it is worth it to spend the $2 million to drive it further out. I pay taxes for a lot of things I don't use. I'm willing to pay that extra fee. Thank you for your time.
Yes. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, continue.
For the record, my name is Leroy Cabana. I have to live next to Jim. But actually, those guys stole a lot of my thunder. But what I would like to impress on everybody involved with this deal is more forward thinking, because I see a little bit of entanglement with the distance that you have to take refuge. Almost every city in the United States is trucking or training their refuge. And they're not worried about going 13 miles or 15 miles or 17 miles. They're actually transporting their transfer station refuge decent distances. And if you're going to be looking at 100-year dump, I actually agree with these guys. This is such a painful process for people to have a dump built next to their house. It's insane, okay? So if we can think down the road, let's try to alleviate this painful process in the future. Maybe you're right. Maybe one dump is going to last for 1,000 years. Let's try to put it someplace where it has the least impact. And if you think of the forward thinking process, if you look at transportation, electricity is coming, just like Jim said. And we're thinking today, $5 a gallon diesel, but we're talking about a 100-year plan. Nobody's thinking there's going to be $5 diesel in 100 years, okay? So I think that we should quit lowering the score on these farther out places that have a less impact on people than we do worrying about trying to get within 10, 12, 14, 21 miles of someplace. We're worried about a hill incline and all this other stuff. Let's think about building something that lasts forever, that will have the least impact on people, and think about what the transportation possibilities are in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Because right now, almost everybody in this room is thinking about $5 diesel. It drives me crazy. So that's my deal.
My name is Rick Kristen, and can we bring a map up? Guys, it's 2015-00-300. I believe there's 2 sites in the Milliken Valley. Yeah, and I think there's another one to the northwest, but I'm not certain. And I think that just south of that 845 acres is Pine Mountain itself. I'm not just saying. So Pine Mountain it's a huge recreational area for OHV people, mountain bike people, cross-country skiers in the winter, people that camp. You got the University of Oregon Observatory up there that needs dark skies at night. And I'm also here on behalf of the Oregon Desert Air Riders, which is a paragliding and hang gliding club that's been utilizing that site since 1980. And we fly the Pine Mountain area with by the use of thermals and ridge lift. And if there is a facility like that there and they're using the methane is producing flames, that disturbs the air for us and makes it a dangerous place to fly. Addition to that, there's a little runway there called the Milliken Airport. And I'm a pilot and we fly in there several times a year. And if there's birds in the area, it's going to be a problem for the pilots also. There's also a number of vacation cabins up there and permanent residents that live in the Milliken Valley now. So that's another thing to take into consideration. There's also a number of wells in the area used for irrigation and for private use. So that should also be something that they should consider. Pine Mountain is a pristine area. It's one of the only mountains in the eastern area of Oregon that has pine trees on it. And a lot of nature, a lot of animals that live there also. But I'll go ahead and submit this in a written form.
Thank you.
All right.
Next row.
My name is Harrison.
I'm sorry, I
Ruffin.
didn't see it. Harrison,
Ruffin, R-U-F-F-I-N. I'm own one of the vacation cabins that this gentleman has alluded to. Love Pine Mountain. I'm a paraglider. My concern is the operational costs. You know, anything beyond that Horse Ridge incline is going to significantly increase the energy that's used to transport waste out there. The man hours that are used, which I don't believe will change, regardless of whether they're burning electricity or fossil fuels. It's also, I moved here from Virginia. I lived in Charles City. I was a rancher there. And we built a large landfill near my house in Virginia. And we imported trash from New York City. We have an inspection station at that landfill. And it was noted that trash that was imported from other states routinely contained more toxic products, used motor oil, cleaning products, than trash that came from local areas such as Richmond. People that have their trash exported further away tend to care less about what their trash contains than when it's deposited locally. A site such as the one owned by the irrigation district, I think Bend residents and people along Highway 97 that apparently produce most of that trash would consider more thoroughly what they throw away because it's being deposited close to where they live. It's a real thing. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
thank you. Next row.
Linda Swearingen, and I'm a resident in the city of Redmond. And I suggest you contact the Redmond City Council about locating a landfill at Negus, because what we're doing to Redmond, if that site was picked, is exactly what we've done here in Bend. It's too close to the UGB, and as fast as Redmond's growing, we're going to end up with the same problem we have here at not landfill. So I would just like to have that considered.
Thank you, Linda.
Shelley Boyd, but actually I have it all down in writing. I'm just going to submit this to you today.
Okay, you want to paraphrase anything? You get a couple minutes here.
You know what? Everybody's done a real good job. I like it. I like what Robin said, and this guy out here flying, and the grouse, and I've got it all in here for you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Yeah, my name's Steve Wright, and I do own also a vacation cabin out there by Milliken, have 15 acres. And I'm about a half a mile from one of the sites that was identified, that site right there. And I wonder, you know, I wasn't identified or mailed a letter, and I know you're gonna mail them to just the abutting properties, but is there a reason why you cannot mail notices to people that are, say, within at least a mile. Because there's a whole bunch of private properties that are just on the west side of that site right there. At least 130 tax lots on the left side that are mostly private. And I think these people should be notified in writing, because they might not get the news article on the news or the newspaper. They should know about it. The other thing was, Rick mentioned the Pine Mountain Observatory up there, and you know, they need clean air, night sky, dark. Was the Pine Mountain Observatory people, the U of O, were they notified of this area? I think that's crucial. This is their whole zone. Just a couple other things, you know, like the recreation. Same thing, I'm a hang glider pilot. I fly off the top of Pine Mountain. It's a beautiful area. They have a landfill there. This doesn't do it. Anyway, it's, I've written a bunch of other comments and sent them in, and I might throw some more together, and I'll let some time for some other people.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
My name is Matthew Hyman. I'm a property owner and a resident of Deschutes County since '91. There's 3 sites kind of in that Milliken Valley that the visual impact, since the landscape is so open and wide, would be a major impact. You'd see it for miles and miles. There's nowhere to hide these things. And in fact, I know any of the property owners out there, it'd be out their front door, and you'd be looking at the landfill and then the mountains in front of it. And you know, the reason we're out there is for the beauty of the landscape and the serenity. And this would be a huge visual impact and harm to our quality of life as humans, you know, participating, living part-time and recreating out there. Very close to this, there's a lot of Native American cultural sites at the mouth of Dry River Canyon. Really close to this site, there's some amazing pictographs. I think there are a lot of cultural sites in the valley. The Milliken Well is heavily documented by the University of Oregon for artifact collection. I mean, the whole Milliken Valley is a very special place. And I also think there's a lot of recreation happening in the state parks and around Central Oregon. And I really see this as the next area that people will be filtering to for the outdoor recreation, the flyers, the hikers, mountain bikers. The OHV trails run right through these properties. It's a heavily used area, even though it doesn't seem like it is when you drive by it. But in fact, it really gets quite a use, and it's a real asset to Deschutes County to protect this zone. You toss in the wildlife combining areas of the antelope and the deer and the sage grouse, it's all happening right there in that valley. So and again, it's not just that site, there's 3 sites right there that the visual impact would be extreme. And then you add in, of course, with the winds, the smell and impacts from that, and the visual impacts to the observatory and the university. I mean, that the telescopes are another asset to the county. They've discovered many things in the universe from those telescopes, and it's been there for 30, 40 years. So I do want to make sure that the university has been contacted and it's a part of the process as well. Thank you, Matthew.
Anyone in the, yeah, my name's John. Hi, everybody.
John,
Yeah.
your last name again, John, sorry.
Ashworth.
Thank you.
What everyone said is, you know, we all have our notes. I'm not gonna take too much time. About 8 years ago, a neighbor of mine had a representative from from Warm Springs Reservation come out. We found a plethora of arrowheads, also spiritual wheels and probable burial sites in Milliken. And I just want to make sure that the right people in Warm Springs, or also the other sub-tribes that live through here. There's a great book called the Milliken Memoirs, and it talks about the whole history from the late 1800s of the Milliken family and other families that grew up there and came all the way to Bear Creek and pardon me, to Bend, and historical significance of that area is great. Plus, it's a beautiful place. It's a nickname Sky Lake. People go out there just to chill, and to have a landfill out there would really be an obstruction of just the INA, so hope we keep that into, I mean, we all have a stake and we all have a reason to be here, but that it's a beautiful place and a lot of people don't even know about it. So let's keep it pristine, please.
Thank you. Anyone in the back room? Yes.
I had a couple questions.
Name, please.
Sorry, my name is Sarah Palmer Antonio. And with that map that's up there in comparison to other maps, I was wondering about the land use scoring. And it seems like some sites that you have are also in close proximity to highways, and you have that as a low land use score, but then some of these areas in southeastern part of the county, it seems like that proximity to roads isn't scored the same, but maybe I'm not interpreting your criteria correctly. Also, again, that Ford Road is not abandoned. None of those roads are abandoned. There are people living out there. And as opposed to the site in Redmond, that was a question that was raised. Well, have the people been cleared off the land? Those types of things. So it doesn't, maybe I haven't gone through all the research that y'all have gone through, and I really appreciate all your hard work. And that's maybe why I'm not understanding some of the criteria, because to me, I see a vibe going on of there's some people that understand why these were scored certain ways, and then some of us aren't quite understanding, and we don't see the cohesiveness or the unbiased going across the board with each of these now 12 sites. So that was a little confusing to me. Also, when I first got this letter in the mail, where I have my property out in Milliken, I can't put up a fence. So it doesn't make any sense to me that this is being considered for an entire landfill. Also, my last point is I'm not quite sure what type of landfill you're putting up. So more information about what types of systems are going to be. When I first was born in Bend, our landfill was just a mound of trash. And you went out and you put your junk in the mound of trash and you could pick through it. I have a pretty good idea that that's not what you're planning on building. So to have us have a better understanding of if you're going to have incinerators, what types of machines and things are you going to have out there? What can we expect if this does go through? Because then we'll have a better idea of why you have this criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Givens had a question. Back up. Dave Givens is our county auditor.
Well, I wasn't expecting to be called on, but thanks, Chad.
I wasn't necessarily going to call on you, Dave. I was going to respond to your comment there about the elevation. That's kind of a site-specific design consideration. Go out to the Denver Airport. There's a landfill, and that's all flat ground out there. And there's a large hump. Not landfill's kind of unique that we do pretty substantial excavation, and that have our maximum height limited to about 30 feet above the elevation of the 27th Street. So it's really a site-specific thing as to what the configuration of the landfill actually looks like.
Yeah, what I was raising was that I've used to live in Southern California, and they had a couple landfills in the lower hills that where they took up the valleys, the airspace between the valleys, and created opportunity for space there. So again, you talked a little bit about the site characteristics in terms of elevations problems. Sometimes that elevation problem could be an asset for you in some circumstances. So just something to raise as awareness.
Yeah, it's a point well taken, and that we actually have been looking at that, but now at Focus, we're going to be able to look at that more, definitely more, particularly the old canyon fills, what they call them, canyon fills, where you had much more efficient operation because of that. And, that is, one consideration for sure.
The Golden Basin site is an example.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave.
Is that everybody who wanted to comment today? Did we hear from everybody? I know, just is there anybody else? This is my question.
Can I just make one last comment on this site specifically? I think it had been rejected for a gravel pit site before. Is that so?
We have the Roths here, they can answer for that. It's hard to put you on the spot.
Not that I'm aware of. But Could be.
I think Robinson or for construction of the site that was further west, I believe.
Just a couple miles west, I believe.
Right, yeah. Yes.
Daniel Baca, couple additional comments, ones I forgot to bring up. That, you know, anybody that's gonna walk out of this building right now, you're gonna smell the landfill as soon as you walk out of here. And the distance that we are to the landfill is the distance to my house. You know, the amount of sounds you guys are gonna hear going on Highway 27 here are gonna be the ones going down my road. You know, in order to, you know, bring everybody's garbage out there. Also, the other thing I didn't mention is when we built our house, we integrated it into the landscape. We didn't tear down any of the trees, which, you know, nobody's mentioning that around here, but we have trees around here that are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And we're gonna just push them over and create a landfill. Something that, you know, nobody's even bringing up, you know, for these particular sites. There's other people who are mentioning that they are gonna be impacted when they go to that place and when they recreate at that location. But we live at these locations right next. We're there 24/7 if not. And it's not a if or a possibility, it is an immediate impact.
Thank you, Dan. Anything else? Okay, well, we only ran 5 minutes over. That was pretty good. We will be posting information from this meeting on the website. The slideshow will be on there this one already. And if you have not registered, please register at send us an email. We'll get you on the information list. We can share information as we move down the process here. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We do appreciate your comments and concerns here. Have a pleasant holiday. Oh, meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Best of luck.
Just